going to be making a wreath from a wreath kit I have at sweetariadecor.com. This particular one is a fall wreath. However, you can use this for any type of pancake wreath kit that I have on my site. From your kit, you will have one roll of 10-inch mesh, a 2.5-inch ribbon, and a 1.5-inch ribbon, 13 chenille stems, they're pipe cleaners, one 10-inch square sign, one 14-inch wreath frame. We're going to start by using the chenille stems and the wreath frame. So on this wreath frame, there are 4 rings around it, and there are 6 spines that connect these rings. So we're going to make sure that we use all of the spots where the spines connect to the rings. This is where we're going to start adding our chenille stems, or pipe cleaners. So you put it in between rungs 2 and 3. You bring it around over ring 1, tuck it under ring 2, and then you twist those ends together. This pipe cleaner is going to be how you connect the mesh. Here's a closer look. So you put it on the left side between rings 2 and 3. You pull it up over the top of ring 1 on the right-hand side. Push it down on the right-hand side between rings 2 and 3. And then pull it to tighten. And then you will twist this. There we go. And tighten it. You don't want it to be loose. That'll make your mesh shaky. This is where we're going to attach the mesh ruffles and the ribbon, so we've got to make sure that it's secure. So you continue doing this all around the inside 6 rings. Now it's time to do the outside rings. So we're going to be working between the spines, so right in the middle between there, and we're going to be using rings 3 and 4. Put it between rings 2 and 3, bring it down over ring 4, bring it back between 2 and 3, pull tight, and then twist. Again, between rings 2 and 3, down over 4, back into 2 and 3, and twist. And you'll continue doing that until you have the 6 outside rings completed. Now you've got all 12 and we're ready to move to the next step. Now it's time to move to the mesh. So I'm going to unwrap my roll of 10-inch mesh. And you can roll this out on a mat. You can measure it with a yardstick, whatever works for you. I happen to have a mesh roller that I use. This is from Susie's Wreaths and Things, and it holds my mesh for me, which makes it easier to cut because the roll's not going all over the place. So I am going to show you here. You would cut your mesh at 18 inches if you're using it by scissors. And then I like to lay them flat, kind of flatten out. But now here, if I'm going to use a rotary cutter, it's basically the same process. I'm going to pull that out, and I'm going to cut that at 18 inches. And I'm going to continue to do this. I am going to cut 12 pieces total. I wish it went this fast in real life. And then we have our nice stack of flattened mesh. Now I'm bringing the wreath frame back over, and now we're going to start adding the mesh onto the frame. How we do this is start with one piece. We are going to flatten this out. Do it as best you can. You can even put a weight on the end of it to keep it from rolling back up. Now gather it in the center and scrape your fingers up the middle. So basically you're gathering it, and you should hear a scraping sound if you're doing it correctly. You want to gather that all up nice and tight, but it's flat, and then you end up with a bow tie shape. This is the shape that ends up becoming circular, hence the name pancake wreath. And we want to put that into one of the openings on the bottom ring of the wreath, put it in between the twist ties, and then twist it to hold. Then we want to take the ends and overlap them. This kind of keeps it from either hiding any mesh that might fray and prevents it from fraying any further, because mesh does fray no matter what you do. And now you see it creates that beautiful round shape that looks like a pancake. All right, let's try this again. We're going to take another piece of the mesh, flatten it out as best we can, and then gather at the bottom, keeping it flat, and then scrape and gather it up the center. It's easiest to do this if you have a pattern like a plaid where you can easily see where the center is. Now we take our bow tie shape and we're going to put that in the next set of pipe cleaners that is on the outside of this wreath ring. We're going to put it right in there. Now don't untwist it, leave it twisted, and then we're going to then open those up so they're flat, put it in there, and then we'll twist it again. So here we go to get that in there, and just twist it once. We're going to have to reopen those, so you don't want to twist them too tightly. Those will reopen to hold the ribbons. And we're going to continue this all the way around the remaining outside edge of the wreath. And there we go. Overlap all of your edges. Make sure everything looks good. You can also clean up any little strings that are fraying. We can always do that at the end as well. That's kind of a process. You'll do that as you go. Now we're going to find the inside pipe cleaners and pull them out so that they are easier to find for when we are doing our inside ring. Sometimes they're hard to find. There we go. All right, now let us start with the mesh for the inside ring. We're going to do exactly what we did on the outside, except now put it on the inside. So use the same ruffle technique and put it in the same way in the pipe cleaners, twist the pipe cleaners, and then don't forget to overlap your edges to make that round circle shape. As you do this, you may notice that sometimes the mesh sticks to itself on the edges or where you've cut it. Completely normal, that's going to happen. This is our finished wreath with the mesh. Now it's time to put on the exciting part. It's the ribbon time. Get your 2 rolls of ribbon and something to measure it with. I happen to have a ribbon tail board. I'm going to be cutting my ribbon to 14 inches long. Again, you can use a mat. You can use whatever you need to. Now we're going to measure our first ribbon out and cut at 14 inches. We're going to cut 12 of these total. I'm going to use my ribbon tail board to cut multiple at a time. Since I've already cut 1, I only need to cut 11 more of these, so I just wrap it around that ribbon tail board. And then I cut off the end. And then I slide it right off the board, and you'll see that it kind of keeps a loop there. I put the scissors right through that loop, and I just cut right through there. And then I cut through the other loop as well. And now that gives me 11 more pieces of ribbon combined with the other one. That is 12 pieces of ribbon at 14 inches long a piece. Now I'll show you how to dovetail a ribbon. That's to give it a nice finished edge. So you want to bring the 2 wired edges together. So it's basically folded in half with the wired edge on top. You're going to cut angled from the inside out toward the wired edges on an angle. You're going to do that on both sides. So fold it, cut from the inside out to the wired edge. And there you see you have a nice, pretty little V shape at the end. It keeps the ribbons from fraying and it makes everything look nice and finished. I do stack multiple ribbons and dovetail them several at a time if the ribbon is not too thick. I find that this is a time saver, but if you want to be precise, you can also cut them individually as well. Now we're going to cut the other ribbon. This particular one is a 1.5 inch moss faux burlap. And it is thinner than a 2.5 inch, but once we put this in this wreath frame, it actually ends up working out very well. Everything is covered well. It gives you good coverage, but nothing gets hidden. So I'm going to wrap this around again. These are 14 inch lengths. I need 12 of these. Then, as I did with the other ribbon, I'm going to dovetail these. I bend them in half, put the wired edges together, and I cut from the inside out. The more ribbons you cut through, the fatter your stack's going to be, so sometimes you might have to break it into more than 2 groups. And now we can add the ribbons onto the mesh frame. Now that our ribbons are cut, we're going to start adding them to the wreath around the outside of the wreath first, and then we'll do the inside. So we're going to open up those pipe cleaner ties that we have. And you can see the mesh stays. It's not going to pop back open. We take our 2.5 inch on the bottom and lay the 1.5 inch over the top. And then what we're going to do is fold the ribbon in half and press down to make a crease. This tells us what the center point is for the ribbons, and we gather that up, we pinch it, and then we're going to put this right inside that opened pipe cleaner. And then we're going to twist it back up. Now I keep twisting it until I have about 1 inch to 1.5 inches of twist on that pipe cleaner. And we're not going to need to open these up anymore. So I'm going to take my scissors and I'm going to cut it off, leaving about 1 inch left. So once I snip those off, I take the remaining pipe cleaner and I kind of open up that little piece of mesh and I push it in behind there. So it's kind of behind the mesh and it's kind of touching the frame. So it's all hidden. No one is ever going to see that. And then I want to take my ribbons and I want to spread them out. So there's 2 ways you can do your ribbons. You can do them where you've got the 1.5 inch together in the center with the 2.5 inch on the outside, or you can switch it around so that they're alternating. And this is how I typically like to do mine. That way it makes sure that 2.5 inch doesn't get lost in there. And this helps to stagger the pattern nicely. We're going to repeat the step that we just did for the remaining 5 ruffles on the outside ring of this wreath. And as you go around and do this, you want to make sure again that your ribbons are separated from each other. They may tend to migrate back toward each other, but we'll fluff it out again once the wreath is complete. And then by that point, they should stay in place, no problem. And now we're going to do this again on the inside ring. And this is, again, 6 sets of ribbon tails we're going to be putting in there. So we're going to start with that inside ring and repeat the same steps with lining up your ribbon, bending them in half, gathering up the center, twisting it into the pipe cleaners, twisting that pipe cleaner around, and then snipping off that piece so that we have about 1 inch to 1.5 inches left, and then pushing it between that open gap in the mesh and pushing it to the back of the wreath. As you are adding in your ribbon tails, you may notice some little stray strings coming out from where the mesh is fraying a little bit, so feel free to go ahead and clean those up as you go along. It also is a good idea to do that once the wreath is completely finished, to flip it over on the back and you can snip off those annoying little strings. And here we go. We've got the last one in there. So this is what the finished wreath looks like when we're done putting in the ribbon tails. I'm going to go through, give it a final adjustment, check everything for alignment, and hey, it's ready to put our sign on. Here we go with our little Farm Fresh pumpkin sign. Now I'm going to give you 2 options for the sign. You can put it in the center or off to the side. So I show you how to make both. So first we're going to start with putting it on the center. Now your sign will come with the stapled pipe cleaners already attached onto the back. I did this in case you don't happen to have a stapler. But for this example, I'm going to show you how I did this so you can do this yourself on future wreaths. So the back of the sign has a rope attached on there. That's mainly meant just to hold it for sale. That's not really meant to use to attach it to your wreath. It's not very sturdy, and your sign will swing back and forth. So what we want to do is to build it up with a little bit of cardboard, because the staples are so deep that it'll go through to the front of the sign. So I took the cardboard from one of my previous mesh tubes and I've cut it into strips. And then I'm going to use that to cut into like little squares that I put there. And I put 2 squares. You see how thin narrow that is? Yeah, we've got to build that up. So I put 2 squares on top of each other in each corner. And this is very easy to do. I like using materials that I've already got. It was free, didn't cost me anything, and it works just fine. So I put 1 set of 2 in each of those corners. And then I will use those pipe cleaners as well, and my staple gun. And I'm going to staple it 3 times to make sure that that's is not going to come off of the sign. So it's on there really good. So I do this once in each corner, 3 staples on each pipe cleaner. And now that our sign is prepared, we can attach it onto the wreath. So we're going to use the spots that are already there with the pipe cleaners on the wreath. You can see it's the 2, 4, 8, and 10 o'clock positions. And we're going to feed those pipe cleaners right through the same spots that have already been carved out for when we put in the mesh and the ribbons. So that spot is already there. You just have to push the pipe cleaner through the mesh. And sometimes that can be a little bit tricky. It might take a little bit to get that to go through. But you try to avoid poking it through anywhere else in the mesh. Just kind of use the spaces that are already there. And once it's through, then you just twist it right behind the wreath frame. You don't have to twist it to its final tension, because we can flip it over and we can fix it once the sign is all on, because you might need to adjust it a little bit because we are putting 4 corners on. So just put it on there as best you can, and then we'll tighten it in just a moment. So we're going to put on corners 3 and 4. And now we're going to flip it over so that we can tighten those. So the same as how we did it before with the pipe cleaners, we just twist it around. Now here I leave about a 2-inch or a little longer length before I snip off the pipe cleaners, because I like to also wrap that around. You see what I'm doing there? I'm wrapping it around the wire rings. It'll kind of help hold that in place. You might also want to keep those longer in case you ever decide to take the sign off and use it somewhere else. But this is what the wreath looks like if there's no bow and the sign is centered. We fluff it out a little bit, and here we go. Not every wreath needs a bow, especially if it's going in a storm door. Maybe you want to keep it nice and simple. So this is that particular option. And you'll see this is how thin that wreath is. That is under 4 inches. Perfect for a storm door. But now let's see what it looks like with the sign off center and we add a bow. So I'm checking my position of where I want it to go, and I do try to align it with the existing pipe cleaners on the wreath so that I don't have to poke any new holes in the mesh. So I can use the 2 o'clock and 6 o'clock positions. So I'll start by feeding it through the 6 o'clock position down at the bottom of the wreath. And just like we did with the other method, it's just going to go right in that spot that already exists there, even if you have to struggle with it for just a little bit. And then once that has poked through, I'm going to twist it together underneath. And now I'm going to try to work on the 2 o'clock position. And if you're doing it this way, you can cut off the additional pipe cleaners that are attached in the other 2 corners. You're probably not going to need those, so you can go ahead and snip those off. All right, now let's try to attach it at the 2 o'clock position. And I ended up going against my rule, and I had to put it between the 1 o'clock and the 3 o'clock. So it kind of went into 2 o'clock. I had to put it into the mesh directly, not into where the ribbons already were, because I needed to have it scooched over enough to the right where I still had room to put my bow. And now that the position's good, we're going to flip it over so that we can tighten our pipe cleaners or chenille stems and make sure that the sign stays secure. So we're going to twist those pipe cleaners around, snip it off, and then take the rest of the pipe cleaner and poke it around to the back of the wreath frame, so that way it does not scratch the door. And now I think we're ready to make a bow. I'm going to bring out my trusty Easy Bows Design Pro to help me make the bow. You can also even use a chip clip to hold the bow while we make the layers, or you can even do it by hand. There's lots of videos out there on how to make the bow. This is just using this particular tool, as this is the only way I can make a bow. My hands don't work very well. So I start with the 2.5-inch ribbon. That's going to be on the bottom. And I like to start by dovetailing my end just because I'm weird and I like to do it that way. So I put it through the little tines in there, and I'm going to make sure that the tail is touching 6 inches. Then I'm going to pinch that ribbon and I'm going to twist it. So I pinch and twist so that the pretty side is on the right And the solid back side of the ribbon is now on the left, but fret not, it won't stay that way. We're going to bring that back over through those little tines and make our loop. That loop should come out to about 5 inches. And then we do the pinch and twist again. The pinch and twist is the most important part of bow making. It's what gives you those nice crisp loops that operate separately, and it gives it life. We're going to cut that off a little past 6 inches because now we're going to dovetail that end. So snip, snip, there goes the end. Now on this bow, we're going to have the tails actually both coming down so that the loops are up top. So I started on the left-hand side. I pulled that loop so it comes down a little bit, and then I'm going to grab the one on the right-hand side, kind of pull that down too. We don't want them to come straight down, just on a little bit of an angle because we don't want it to cover up our sign. So then our 1.5 inch ribbon, I dovetail the end of that. I put it through the center of the bow maker. That end came out to 5 inches. Now we're going to pull that top ribbon over and make a loop that is at 4 inches. We pinch and twist. There we go, 4 inches on that left loop there. And then on the right-hand side, we are also going to make that 4 inches. Solid ribbon is so much easier to not have to worry about the pattern. All right, and then we are going to twist it again and bring it over, but this time we're just going to have a little tiny 1 inch loop for the center. I call this like a little sweet center bow. It's got that tiny little loop. Now don't worry that both of the ribbon tail ends are both coming off the right hand side because we're going to fix that later. So then you kind of cut this one so that it matches, again, just a little past 5 inches. So then you can dovetail it. All right, now we need our pipe cleaner. And we're going to pick up that bow from the bottom, keep all the layers together. So apply a lot of pressure, squeeze it together. It's going to be kind of flat anyway, so it shouldn't be too hard to do. Wrap that pipe cleaner around there. And then we're going to twist it real tight. And twist it about 1 or 2 times to make sure nothing's going to unravel. Sometimes you can just hold on to the pipe cleaner and twist the bow. And now we're going to make sure that we've got the bottom tails are coming down on that back ribbon there with a little plaid pattern. And then we do the same with the moss tails. Fluff out your loop a little bit and then take that center bow, that center loop, fluff it out and then drag it toward the right. That'll kind of cover it. It'll look completely centered. And then you drag that other tail toward the left. And you can never tell that those 2 tails are both on the same side. So here is our cute little ribbon. We can always adjust it. Once we get it on the wreath, we can do our final adjustment of the length on those tails. And now we're going to bring our wreath back. We're going to get those pipe cleaner ends from the back, and we're going to feed it through. Now here, again, you have to feed it through the mesh. This is not going to line up with feeding it through where the pipe cleaners already were on the wreath frame. So we kind of have to feed it through, but it should not be very hard. You're not going to have to feed it through any ribbons. It's strictly going through the mesh. So you're going to have it going through rings 1 and 2. So the smallest 2 rings is where it should straddle that. And you'll see that in just a moment. Here we go. I'm going to flip it over, and you'll see it's between rings 1 and... Actually, this is 2 and 3. It's between 2 and 3. It doesn't really matter. It's close enough. And then I just twist it, and then I cut off the ends. I kind of bend that around the wreath frame so that it doesn't snag on anything else. And then now we can flip this over and play with the adjustment. We'll want to make sure our loops and our tails are all separated and that nothing is overlapping each other. Each individual ribbon should have its chance to shine. You can kind of play around with how you want that situated. We're going to make sure that we don't cover any of the words on the sign. So you see that green ribbon. It's kind of a little bit long, so we're going to shorten that just by about maybe an inch or so. There we go. That way we can still get the tails in there, but it's not going to end up covering up our wording. There we go. Now we're going to go back around the wreath, kind of do our final adjustment on the placement of all of the ribbons to make sure everything is situated where we want it to be, rebend everything so that nothing is overlapping each other. give it its final once over, its last look before it goes out the door, if you will. And there you go. This is what it looks like with the bow in the top left corner. So there's the finished ribbon with a centered sign and no bow. And here it is with an off-center sign and a cute little bow in the top corner. I hope you had fun making this wreath. Happy fall! Thanks for watching. You can follow me on Facebook and TikTok, and you can also see all of my available creations at sweetariadecor.com.